Howdy folks, how's everyone doing today? We're going to talk about relational databases today. So if you haven't had a database course or like Intro to Databases 1200 course before as a prereq, that's okay. It's not required. It'll make things make a whole lot more sense if you've had some database work before, but again, you're not going to necessarily need it. And then I'll give you all the things that you need database-wise to get the project and the labs done here. But it'll just, it might make a little more sense if you've taken the class before. And if you have taken the class before, today might be a little bit boring, unfortunately, because we've got to go over some of those concepts. But the first thing we want to talk about is how do we store data, right? And this idea of, well, ways that we can electronically store data. You might be familiar with just putting things in a text file. So this is just a plain old notepad text file. And if I wanted to store some things in here, I could start just listing things out here in text. So if I were going to imagine, if I was going to start up a store, I might have apples, and then I might sell them for $1. And then I might have bananas, and I might sell them for 50 cents. And then I might have cucumbers, and I might sell them for, I don't know, 75 cents each. And then I might have some other kind of food here. How about donuts here? And maybe donuts are $1.50 each here. And we can just start listing all these things out here. Now, this is not going to work very well if anyone else wants to use this system if they're not sitting at my computer here, right? The file is only in one place, only one person can edit it, and it doesn't work very well. And then, going and changing it's going to be a small pain and all sorts of things. So local files just don't really cut it when we start getting bigger and we start needing multiple people to have access to this information, because eventually my little store here, start up a little shop on my street, I guess, be a fruit stand vendor, and if that gets big enough, maybe I need to have 2 different cash registers, because we're going to sell things so fast people don't want to wait around. Well, now 2 different cashiers need a place to go and look up this information, and it's just not going to work here. And then other things that I might want to be tracking as well. It's like, well, how many apples do I have in stock? Well, I have, we'll say like 25 of them. And then how many bananas do I have in stock? Maybe I've got 100 bananas. And cucumbers, maybe I've got just a dozen of those. And for donuts, maybe I've got 2 dozen donuts. Right? So we're starting to have lots of pieces of information here. And then if I need to edit them, I sell them. And then if I get a delivery, right, or if I go harvest things from my garden, I guess I don't have a banana tree, but I could, pick some apples from apple tree, or pick some cucumbers from the garden, and maybe go make some donuts, right? We can increase or decrease our stock here, right? We decrease when we sell it, we increase it when we stock up. And again, being in a single file just doesn't work very well. And again, it's not really organized well either, because I have got, there's some numbers here, there's some text here, there's some dollar amounts here, and then what else do I want to know? Well, maybe I want to know like how old my apples are. If they're getting too old, I won't be able to sell them anymore. And then I start throwing more information in here. Like this was, I don't know, these were from May 20th here, and they're getting a little old. So sure, right? We might need to start changing them out. So as we have more need for data as well, it gets harder and harder and harder to just kind of jam into one line here. So one of the things you can do is use a spreadsheet. Right? And hopefully spreadsheets are familiar to you. If you have not used them before, that's okay. But what this lets you do is you have rows of information and columns. So generally, we'd like to organize these things. We will label our columns. We'll say, hey, here's like the name, and here's a price column, and here's a quantity on hand column, and then maybe I have a purchase date column or something like that, if I'm tracking these. And then now my columns have nice names. So then I can say, okay, so this is for my apple. Here, my price for an apple was $1. My quantity on hand, I had, I don't know, 50 apples, and the purchase date we said was like May 20th or something. Sure, and then we had bananas. We were selling those for 50 cents each, and then we had 2 dozen of those or something, and I don't know when we got these. Maybe we just don't have a day here. And then we had cucumbers, right, and those were 50 cents each, and we don't even have the dollar sign there. We'll fix that. And we had a dozen cucumbers, and I don't know when I harvested them. And you can sort of organize a little bit nicer here, and then like you can put a name to your columns here, and it's going to kind of look a little prettier, but it's still just going to be a file one place. And now there are some fun options, and you can have files out in the cloud and multiple people can get at them, and you can have Office Online documents, but you still run into lots of issues here where sharing the data and trying to update the data and those sorts of things just don't work well. I mean, they sort of do. They kind of work as a multi-user system, but it's not great, and bad things could happen, right? So if I'm going in and I'm going to update my stock, hey, I just got a bunch of apples that I picked, I'm about to go update this. If someone else is also updating it at the same time, and I say, oh, okay, well, I can see there's 50, and I just picked 50 more, I'm going to put in 100, and then I put in 100, and just about the same time someone else says, oh, I just sold 10 apples, I had 50, now I go down to 40, right? I lost an update. And that's no good. We don't want to lose data like that. That's no fun. And then we run into other trouble, like, what if I wanted to track my customers? Well, I can add another sheet here. We can say, okay, this is our products sheet, and maybe this will be our customers sheet. And then maybe I've got customers. Maybe I'll have Jeb and Vivi and Journey and Jubilee and Jack and Joy as our customers here. So actually, Genevieve, her full name is Genevieve with a J, J-E-N-A-V-I-E-V-E. She goes by Vivi, but those are my 6 kids here. All J's, the 4th generation of J's. My wife's grandfather was a J. All of his kids were J's. Most of my wife's cousins are J's, and then all of our kids are J's. That's just kind of fun. But, if I wanted to track customers, and then maybe I wanted to track, how much money they spent, and if they spend enough money, then maybe I'll send them a coupon, or, the last time they purchased something. So maybe we add in some information here, right? We can add in some column headers. We can say, hey, this is their name, this is their, total purchases within 30 days, and this is like the last purchase date or something. I don't know. Right, if you spend enough money within 30 days, you get a coupon. And if you haven't shown up in a long time, maybe we want to send you a coupon to be like, hey, please come back. Those sorts of things. We could track things there. And then if I wanted to track, well, what things do people buy most often? Well, I guess I could have another sheet here for, like, this might be our transactions here. And we could do that sort of thing. So we might have the customer, we might have the product, we might have the date, we might have the price. We can come up with all sorts of things, or maybe a quantity as well in here, right? The product, the quantity, the date, and the price. So we can say, okay, well, customer Jeb bought apples. He really likes green apples for some reason. He eats like a bunch of them. So maybe he's going to buy 5 green apples. And maybe he bought them today. And then for the price, well, if he bought 5 apples, well, let me go look at products here. 5 times $1 here. I guess we're charging $5 here for the price, and so on and so on and so on. We could start listing out some transactions, but again, it's a little messy here. And then we have other issues where, well, what if Jeb's information changes here? Because I'm just relating here to Jeb. So if I go and change this table here, maybe he wants to go by his full name instead of his nickname. Well, now I'm not going to know which customer it is. Right? And we can have all sorts of trouble here matching up, well, who this actually is and which product is this. Was that the green apple? Was that the red apple? It's not super descriptive. So again, it sort of works, and you can make spreadsheets work, but that's not really what they're designed for. So enter the relational database. There's all sorts of database history you can go learn about if you're interested, but relational databases have been around for quite a while, and really the whole purpose of them was to relate data. So we know that data just doesn't live in silos. We don't just have a list of customers and customer information, right? Maybe I have their address or their phone number or their email address, right? I want to email them coupons, I want to mail them coupons, I want to text them coupons, or reminders, or hey, information about sales, all sorts of things, right? That customer information is nice to have, but it doesn't live independently all on its own. We don't just have a single file for customers. We want to relate that customer information to other locations in our database, to other pieces of information that we have, like, hey, what things have they bought, right? And what things are they interested in? We can look back at their history and see that sort of thing. So relating databases is the idea, or relating information in databases is about relational databases. So when we installed XAMPP, we had Apache, MySQL, which is really MariaDB, but it's, again, a whole history there, not too big of a deal. So we're going to start up Apache, and we're going to start up MySQL. Now, MySQL should start, no problem. This one's generally pretty stable here. It does get a little funky later. We'll talk about that later on. But then if you click the admin link here for MySQL, it's going to take you to this awesome page here, which is PHPMyAdmin. So PHPMyAdmin is a MySQL administrator tool written in PHP. So we can work with a PHP application to access the MySQL database. And it tells us some information about it here, all sorts of good things. Again, this is meant only for testing development purposes, right? We're not going to use this out in the real world. There's whole other database administration issues and security issues and things we just don't really have a chance to get into. But you can see from our home page, right, the little home icon, there's a list of databases on the left, and there's a bunch of setting information. So what we want to do is I want to make a new database. So a database is like a grouping of information here, a grouping of these sort of like tables that we're going to relate here. So I'm going to make a new database here, and what name do we want? Let's call this one, how do we call this one our, let's do stocks, because stocks are interesting. Let's make this our stock database. So they were in the news. It was a little while ago here with all the stock hype, but I think we can have a little bit of fun with stocks. So I'm going to make a stock database, and it creates it. So there's a stock database here, but there's no tables. So now what tables do I want to have in my stock database here? So things that we need to know about stocks, right, that we might want to be tracking here. We need to know their symbol, and we need to know their price, right? That's sort of the main information there. And then we're going to have a list of users, probably, right? And we'll have information about the users. And imagine maybe we're like a stockbroker, right? And we're going to sell stocks to people, and those sorts of things. So we'll have to be tracking all that sort of information. So in our stock database then, maybe we'll have a table for stocks here. And we'll create that table. Now, when you work with a table here, so in Excel, I can really just throw anything I want in here. It says name, but I can put in 1, 2, 3, and Excel says, oh, sure, that's fine. With a database, we have to be very specific here. So if the field name is, so for stocks here, let's go with our symbol here. Now, they will always be the same type. So there's a couple types we work with in SQL here. Ints are for integers, varchars are for variable number of characters, text is for even larger blocks of text here. You can get, this one is saying 65,000 characters versus, how's that? 2 varchar, oh, those look like the same number. The maximum length. Okay. The date is for just a date. Now, dates and times are really weird. We'll talk about those in a little while here. So there's just the date. There's the date and the time. There's a time stamp, and a time stamp is the number of seconds since 1970, January 1st, 0 UTC. It's a weird way to store data, but it's a pretty common convention for timestamps. And then what's great about this is it is always based on UTC, not local time zones, right? Because time zones are really weird and tricky. So date time only has the date and the time, but you don't know what time zone it came from. So if you have a database that is being used by people across more than one time zone, date and time's not all that useful for you because you have no idea what time zone you're getting. So the timestamp is generally a little more preferred for that. And then, for strings, right, the variable number of characters, just regular characters, a fixed length set of characters, text, long text, you can get all sorts of fun options here. So we're going to go with, for this, how about just a variable number of characters? And then you can tell it the max length. So I want to say the max is probably no more than 10. I don't actually remember for stock symbols how long they can be, but we'll say 10 is probably fine. Here, so this is our symbol, the variable number of characters. We're all good here. And then another thing we're going to know about stocks then is the name here. So the symbol, right, might be like GME, and their name would be GameStop. So that's probably, again, a variable number of characters, and this might be long. So we'll just go with like 200, because, again, we don't really care too much at this point. It's an interesting database topic of optimizing these sorts of things, but we don't care too much here. So we have the symbol, we have the name, and then we'll have a current price. Now, when you deal with the current price, there's a couple fun things that you can do here. The easy way to do it is you just pick a decimal. So a decimal is a pretty common way of storing a number with a decimal place, right? A certain number of digits. You can use floats and you can use doubles if you want, or reals, those sorts of things, but a decimal is pretty common. Or if you want to, you can be like the New York Stock Exchange and actually use an integer value that stores the number of thousandth of a penny that a stock is listed for here. So You can say, hey, it is, if you say 1,000 thousandths, right, that's 1 penny. You could go that route if you wanted to. Later on in our program, we'd have to do some other arithmetic with it. So I think the decimal is probably easiest for us here. And then if we pick a decimal, we have to tell it the maximum number of digits and the maximum number of decimals. So we're probably safe to say something like 10 total digits, and then maybe 4 decimal places. Maybe we'll go a little larger here. Maybe we'll go like, how about 16 total places with 4 decimals. Again, it's a little funny here, so int is a little easier sometimes to use, but that's okay here. Should be okay. And then one interesting thing when you deal with relational databases is you generally want a way to uniquely identify a row, right? Because you want to make sure we don't have duplicates. Now, symbol should probably be pretty unique, right? You probably shouldn't have 2 symbols being the same, right? You don't want 2 GMEs in your exchange because people will be confused which one is actually GameStop. So that should be unique, but anything that's like text is not necessarily the best way to reference the data. And we haven't talked about referencing, but generally what you want is some sort of integer here. So I'm going to just put a field called ID here. This is the ID. And then if you scroll over a little bit, there's this column called AI or auto increment. If you check that box, it also adds this little index thing that says primary. So what this means is the primary index, or also known as the primary key, is the main unique identifier for any row in this table, and it's guaranteed to be unique. Now again, symbol probably should be unique, so we can pick this dropdown and say it should just be unique here, and we'll just call this, I don't know, stock symbol. Doesn't matter too much here what we're going to call it. That should be okay. So we'll say, hey, this one needs to be unique, but our primary key here will be the ID, and this will be important later here, so that we don't need to worry about the symbol here. Okay, so if we use the ID column, now I'm a big fan of these IDs that auto increment, because that means the computer will take care of that for us. We don't need to tell it what number it is. Hey, you're the 7th stock I've added, or the 8th stock I've added, or the 7,000th stock that I've added. It will just keep on going for me. It tracks it behind the scenes in the database. Relational database management systems are pretty cool. They're pretty handy. Okay, so after we've added our columns here, then we're good to go. We're going to go ahead and click Save, and it's going to make the table for us. So now in the stock table on the left, I can open up and see the stocks table, and I can see, if I go to the structure here, I've got symbol as a unique key, I've got name, I've got current price, and I've got ID as an integer that's going to auto increment. Okay, so this should work out pretty well. So what you're going to be doing for the lab later, you can just take a screenshot of this, right, to show that you've got the table with the right name, you've got all the fields and the types here, because you were going to be kind of following along, making this match. That way, if you haven't done any database work before, you'll have what you need when we start working on our next assignment. Okay, so that's the first table. So that's one table here. And now we're going to go and add another table here, and we'll add a user table. So users table. And again, for users, then we probably have name. What else do we want to know about users? Maybe we'll have an email address. You don't generally put spaces in, so I like the snake casing with the underscores, just be consistent with our PHP things as well. So name, we'll have email address. Now I'm going to also add a balance here. So balance, or maybe we'll say like cash balance. So cash balance. So name should be a variable number of characters, probably like 50, maybe even more than that. Let's go with 100, because like my kids have 15 character last names. So, you know, and for email addresses, probably another 100 or so. We don't really know. For cash balance, we'll probably do decimal again, maybe like 16.4. Right? I mean, they should have it like in whole pennies, so 2 might be fine, but we'll just put it in 4, because if they sell stock that has small fractional values, we can give them small fractional pennies. Then again, I'll add that ID field as an integer. Just check this auto increment box. It adds the primary unique key. Now you might want a unique index on email address. Name is kind of tricky depending on how people are going to do name, and name might even be better as like first name and then last name. Again, that's more database stuff we don't necessarily care too much about right now, but this is probably okay as is with just ID here. So if you want to create a brand new account, that's fine. You just won't have access to your cash balance. So, you know, that's probably okay. But you know, we might want like a email address. Well, let's make this unique, because this will kind of be like your username. When you get a chance to log in, we'll make sure that's unique. So this is our user's email, or maybe user email. I don't know. That should be fine. We'll call that unique because I want to make sure you don't have two of the same email address registered for logging in. We'll get to adding a password in later. Right now we don't really care. I haven't figured out how that all works. So we'll go ahead and save that table. So I've got stocks and I've got users, right? Then I need a way to add the transactions is one way of listing it, but I also want to know like what stocks the user owns, but we can sort of figure that out from transactions. If I have the list of all the things I've ever bought and sold here, right, we can sort of figure that out. So maybe we'll just do transactions. So I'm going to add a transaction table here, and then transaction, I need some pieces of information. So for transaction, we're going to need to know the users, or the user ID. We're going to need to know the stock ID. Right? I need to know which user it was and what stock they bought. I need to know the quantity, and I need to know the purchase, or I don't know, the price here. And then I also, so I need some more columns. Let me add some more columns. I need the date and time. So date and time, I'm going to make a date and time type here. I'm sorry, a timestamp type here. So maybe we'll just call that timestamp. Let's just do that timestamp just to try and make that easy. Price should be a decimal, right? Like 16,4. Quantity, you can buy fractional shares, so let's make that a decimal as well, like 16,4. We'll just do all of our decimals as 16,4. That's probably fine here. And then for the stock ID, that's an integer, and the user ID is an integer. So these here are going to be where relational database management systems actually do all of the really cool stuff. So for user ID, right, if you imagine this table here, if I had this, my customers here, if I had an ID field and I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here, in transactions now, instead of customer name, really this would be customer ID, and then I would say for Jeb, that would be 1. And then I could go look at my customer table and say, oh, okay, let me find customer number 1 and go get all their information. Now, one of the reasons integers are great for this is that they're small, right? Text actually takes up a lot of space, right? 2 bytes per character here, where a single integer you can get in 4 bytes. So it's more space efficient to use the integers. Again, we probably don't really care for our purposes, but it's just a good thing to have, a good practice to be in here. So then our customer ID, and then for the product, then we would probably also have the product ID here as well. So we'd have an ID for product 1, 2, and 3 here. So then when I bought apples, that would really be product number 1. So that would be our product ID here, right? And say, okay, product ID 1, great. And then I can reference and say, okay, look at the product table, find column with the ID of, or find the row with ID of 1 here, and go grab them. So those are references. So our technical term for that here, right, when you are the unique identifier, you're that primary key. If you're in a table that has a different table's primary key that you're relating to, this is known as a foreign key. Okay, so after we make this table, we're going to go and add in those foreign keys here in just a second. So we also then need a ID here for our transactions. We go add one more field here. So I'll add an ID as an integer and just let that auto increment. And life should be good here. Right? So every transaction should be great. So we'll go ahead and save that. Once it's saved here, then to add those relations here, I'm going to go to the relation view. I'm going to say, okay, well, what is my column? So my column here was called stock ID. So the database stock, the table stocks, the column ID. So the ID column in the stocks table should match the stock ID column in my transaction table. Great, so we're going to add that. I'm going to add another one. So these are known as constraints or foreign key constraints. Again, we don't care too much. That's more database stuff. It's not all that important for us. We're going to use our user ID column to the users table ID column. Okay, and I'll save those. And it is actually showing you, so this is the SQL command that's run. You can do this by hand if you want. I'm not a big fan of doing anything by hand because I like when tools do that work for me. But you could write this all out by yourself if you wanted to. But what that means now is my transaction table now relates to the other tables here, which is cool. Now, I'm not going to see it here at all, but that's okay. We'll get to that when we go. So now I've got 3 tables. So now if I wanted to, I could go add something here. So to add data, you go to the Insert tab here and it says, okay, well, what's the symbol here? So this is GME. The name is GameStop Corp or something like that. And the current price, I don't actually remember here. So let's look up GME here. And their current price looks like $115.17. So I'll put that in for the current price. And then the ID, you can just leave blank because it's going to fill that one in for you, which is super cool. So this is the command that's actually run. We'll get into more of these commands a little bit later here as we go, but don't worry too much about it. It adds it in for us. And now if I go back to browse, I can see that there's data in this little table view. I see the symbol, I see the name, I see the current price, and I see the ID. GME, GameStop Corp, 115.17, 00, right, because we said 4 decimal places, ID 1. Great, we've got some stock, and we'll go ahead to user. So I'm going to go to insert. So I thought I had myself here. So this is Eric, my email address. Let's see, a current balance. I'm going to say let's put $1,000 in here for fun. And then again, the ID you don't need. We'll say go. This is the insert command that runs. Great, it was fine. We go browse, and now we see Eric with a cash balance and an ID. Fantastic, we're here. Now we can actually make a transaction. Right? So with what those foreign keys make happen, the database is really good at this. It says, if you try and give me an ID to something that doesn't exist, you will fail. Now, MySQL, PHPMyAdmin, is really handy at making sure that works. So I can just pick on this drop down here and say, oh, what's the user ID? Do you want 1? Right, which is, and it's going to give me the field. The first field here is Eric. Right, it tries to be helpful here with a stock ID, GME, quantity. Let's say I bought maybe 10 of them here. The price then again was 115.17. Current timestamp is great. So this will default to whatever the database current time is. Fantastic. We'll say go. Awesome. So if I bought 10 of those at 115 each, I probably should go and update some money here and say my cash balance is now a little bit lower, but again, that's okay. We'll get to it later. So now we've got some data there, and those are all fine. So if I tried to insert data here, right, I can't even add like an invalid number. It won't even let me here. So it's doing a really good job at that, making sure that we have, it's known as referential integrity. All right, folks, so that's some basics of relational database management systems. I will pick up some more of the commands and things in the next video. I'll see you then.